My clock has been on a voyage. Very rough one. Upon my meeting the captain, he said to me that the difficulty of measuring time with the motion of the sea gave him concern, and he felt I'd attempted impossibilities. He later wrote a report and said Mr. Harrison was seasick throughout, but the motion of the sea was not in the least detrimental to his sea clock, keeping true time.
We believe it performed very well, although we don't know the exact performance of H1. But we have reason to believe it was well within 5 to 10 seconds a day, which would not have won him the Great Longitude Prize, but it was far better than most people had expected, and it gave Harrison great cause to believe that he was on the right track.
Without even asking for additional tests, Harrison put H1 aside and took on the job of producing what he hoped would be an improved model, H2.
In working on H2, Harrison must have employed other workmen, and he would only have given one individual a small amount of work to do, so that no single person could claim to have made any of it and therefore be entitled to any of the prize money. We know Harrison was paranoid about the idea of other people taking his ideas.
After 2 years of painstaking work, Harrison noticed a fatal flaw. When subjected to a specific extreme movement, the accuracy of his bar balances was corrupted.
Being a very ruthless man with himself, he simply then set the machine aside and moved straight on to his third machine. There was no way he could improve it, so he simply left it.
Harrison's development of his large sea clocks was bogging down. Years passed as his quest for perfection led up many blind alleys. For a man obsessed with time, his own time meant nothing to him. And while Harrison stumbled, his rivals, the astronomers, were attempting to win the longitude prize by telling time using our own moon. Their method was beginning to show promise. Both moon and stars move across the night sky. Astronomers knew that the position of the moon against the stars was unique for every minute of every day. They had the makings of a true celestial clock if someone could work it all out in advance. Enter the forceful champion of this lunar method, the Very Reverend Neville Maskelyne.
Neville Maskelyne, he was a bit pompous. The fact he was a reverend, of course, doesn't come into it, because all scientific people who wanted to get on in science had to take holy orders at that time, so we can forget that one. But he was pompous, a bit of a prig, I think, probably.
If John Harrison was the perpetual outsider, Neville Maskelyne was the perfect insider. As a well-bred, ambitious young astronomer from Cambridge, Maskelyne set out to make a name for himself within the scientific establishment.
I find Maskelyne a particularly unpleasant character. He did a great deal for navigation, but here is somebody who kept track of every dime.
Every penny that he spent for about 40 years is in fact recorded.
But he took that same maniacal meticulousness and applied it to his astronomical work, and that's where he did a great good service, and perhaps he couldn't have done it without that sort of attention to detail.
Laboring at Greenwich, Maskelyne observed the motion of the moon against the background of stars. Eventually, he could predict its position for every minute of every day. Using these predictions, Maskelyne produced a set of astronomical tables. Unlike Jupiter, no powerful telescopes were needed. From his ship, a navigator would measure the angle between the moon and certain stars. Then in theory, he could use Maskelyne's tables to find the time at Greenwich. If he had clear weather, precise instruments, and after hours of calculations. But from a rolling deck, just keeping sight of the moon was a difficult chore, even without the lengthy computations.
The method of lunar distances was based on very long calculations. I've read that it needs about 4 hours of calculation after one observation to obtain the longitude. 4 hours of calculations. And during these 4 hours, the boat went during that time. If you use the clock like it was proposed by Harrison, it's enough, more or less, to read the clock.
But the Board of Longitude still would not accept that the clock was the answer, and it controlled the funds Harrison desperately needed to work on his difficult H3.
I think that it was a question that these newfangled gadgets, should we rely on them? The method was perfectly satisfactory. If you had a clock or a watch which could keep absolute time over all these times, then of course that's fine. But would it?
They said a clock can be but a clock, and the performance of mine, though nearly to truth itself, must be altogether a deception. I say, for the love of money, these professors or priests have preferred their cumbersome lunar method over what may be had with ease. For certainly Parson Maskelyne would never concern himself in such a matter if money were not at bottom. And yet these university men must be my masters, knowing nothing at all of the matter, farther than that one wheel turns another. My mere clock being not only repugnant to their learning, but also the loss of a booty to them.
Harrison continued to work. In his H3, he replaced his swinging bar balance with large balance wheels. Almost as an aside, he invented the caged roller bearing, a friction-reducing device still widely used today. And yet his new clock continued to prove troublesome. Perhaps Harrison's large timekeepers had reached a dead end.
It was while he was struggling with H3 that he made the breakthrough that he was desperately looking for. He knew for many years that it would be extremely useful to him if he could improve these dreadful things called pocket watches. And in 1753, he instructed a watchmaker called John Jeffreys to make a watch for him to his own design, to Harrison's own design. The going of the Jeffreys watch far exceeded Harrison's wildest dreams, and he began to realize maybe he'd been barking up the wrong tree for all these years, and he should have been working on watch development, not these large machines.
This was an extraordinary change of direction. Now Harrison was prepared to reject 25 years of his own work and move ahead on an almost untried technology, struggling to make smaller what he had always assumed should be made larger.
The result, of course, was H4, which was finished in 1759, and which positively proved to Harrison that he had solved the problem.
The Board of Longitude ordered H4 to be tested on a proving voyage from Portsmouth, England, to the island of Barbados. Locked in its new protective box, the precious watch had been carefully set to the correct time at Portsmouth, using a sighting of the sun at noon. For 46 days, the Tartar sailed southwest across the Atlantic. The ship passed from the chill of the English Channel to the tropical Caribbean, a temperature difference of 50 degrees. Except for winding, the watch remained untouched in its box throughout the voyage. John Harrison was now 71 years old, and the burden of this test had passed to his son, William. After a month and a half at sea, on the morning of May 13th, 1764, the Tartar dropped anchor off Bridgetown, Barbados. The watch was rowed ashore to be examined. To know if H4 had passed the test, the exact longitude of Bridgetown itself had to be determined to a new level of accuracy. This was clearly work for an astronomer.